Have you ever felt that your word wasn't good enough? A few weeks ago, just last Monday, I was trying to get a package, y'all. So I had placed this order on HomeDepot.com. I was trying to get a package, and anything that's longer than 2 days because of Amazon, right, just gives you this feeling of impatience and like, when is it going to get here? And I kept getting all these emails and all these notifications, and it was like, your package is delayed, and your package is delayed. And so this package that I paid $11 for took like over 2 weeks to get. And so anyways, long story short, I get a notification on my phone. It's like, your package has arrived. I get excited. And so I jump in my car. I was like, yo, I got 15 minutes between this meeting and the next meeting. I'm going to go get my package. And so I get in the car. I go to Home Depot. I get there and I walk up to the clerk and I'm like, hey, my name is John Odom. Like, here's my order number. Any chance I can pick up my package? And he was like, do you have any form of ID on you? And I was like, well, no, I didn't know that I needed an ID. And in retrospect, it makes sense. They want to verify, who you are, so you don't just take somebody's paid-for package. But it put me in this situation where I began this conversation of trying to convince him that I was the person that bought the $11 item. And so I was like, no, like, I promise you, like, I'm the person who bought this. Like, I can show you my receipt. I can show you that Home Depot just texted me saying my package is ready to go. Like I promise. I'm the one who got, and he's like, no, I needed some form of ID. And so I'm looking around, I'm checking my pockets, like, how am I going to, and then the only ID that I had, I was like, okay, well, I'm a pastor, and I try to show him my ID and be like, does this work? Is this sufficient? And he was like, well, it's not a government ID, it's not really that official. And I was like, I don't know if I trust pastors, right? And so now it's like this whole other question. And so I'm like in this conversation trying to figure out, how can I convince him to trust me when he doesn't know me, he doesn't know my character, and just like for sake of protocol, he needs an ID. And so have you ever found yourself in a situation similar where you were trying to have a conversation with somebody, you're trying to convince them, you're trying to get approval for something, you're trying to get validation or whatever it is, and there's just this deficit of trust. And anytime there's a deficit of trust, it puts us in a posture where we feel like we're not in control, because what we sense happening is that the conversation's going a different way or a different direction than the direction that we desire it to go. And those moments can be so uncomfortable for us because we long to have control. Like, our heart just craves control. And when we don't have control, we try to take control or seize control by creating stronger language and trying to be more convincing and more compelling, all the way to the point where we're like, I promise, I swear, and whatever the case may be. But the reality is that that's not a new phenomenon. The reality is that we are not the only people who try to do this when we feel like our life is out of control. So we're going to be continuing our series in The Good Life, which is just a series through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. And so if you have a Bible, I would love if you could open it and turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. As you are turning there, just a little bit of context. We've been walking through these different heart exams that Jesus gives us as he walks through the Sermon on the Mount, because the reality is, in order for us to experience the good life that he longs for us to experience, that doesn't just happen by changing our behavior. It happens actually when he begins to change the condition of our heart, which then leads to new behaviors and a new way of living. And so we're picking basically the heart exam that Jesus is giving us back up in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. So Jesus is preaching and he says this: again, you have heard it said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows that you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And so Jesus makes it emphatically clear that we need not try to compensate in these moments where we feel like we're out of control, where we feel like there's a lack of trust, with an extra formal form of commitment. We don't need to make some sort of vow or some sort of promise, like, I promise you, or I swear I'm going to do this. And we need not even go the extent of swearing by anything on earth or anything in heaven. because our yes and our no should be sufficient. But the reality is, so many of us, in moments like that, we don't feel like it's sufficient. We feel like we have to appeal to some higher form of authority in order for our claim to then be validated or substantiated. And so we attempt to do so by adding somebody else's name or something else into the mix in order to gain approval or validity. And you guys know this to be true, because if you've ever got an email, a phishing email from a company or some random person that's just trying to get your information, what do? In order to try and convince you of the validity or of their statement or their claim or whatever they're asking you to do, they submit the logo or the name of the company that they're trying to pretend to be, right? And so literally the other day I got an email from Xfinity, right? And it had the Xfinity logo, and it was tried to present this really compelling email, and they were asking for my information. Because whenever we know that there's a deficit or a lack of trust in a situation, we try to appeal to a greater source of authority, a brand or a name that has recognition and that has validation with other people who are going to be receptive to that. And I experienced this even when I was playing football, right? Like when I was on the football team and was talking with my teammates, so many times we'd be in a huddle, we'd be talking about something, and somebody would say, man, I swear on my mama that I'm going to do this, or I swear on my mama's grave that I'm going to do this. Or if they really, like, if they weren't a follower of Jesus, then they would say, well, I swear on God that I'm going to do this, right? Like they go that far to say, I swear that I'm going to follow through with my commitment, because if you knew them, they're just like, are you going to follow through on your commitment? Like, I don't know. And so they had to try hard to convince you. But the reality is, all of us struggle to follow through with our commitments, regardless of whether or not we're a follower of Jesus. And that's actually what makes Jesus' claim hard. When he says, hey, I won't let your yes be yes and your no be no, that's actually not an easy command for us to fulfill, because God never fails, but we do time and time again. I mean, just the other week, one of my coworkers, they asked me, they said, hey, would you be willing to be a part of a video and let us do this recording? And I was like, sure, that sounds great. And they put it on the calendar, and then that day came this week. It was yesterday, and I was in the moment. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this video. There's a few other things that I get to get together. And so I had to apologize and message them and say, hey, is there any chance that we can reschedule this? I'm so sorry. And we all struggle to fulfill our commitments that we make, whether it's to our friends, whether it's to our families, whether whoever it is to, whether it's a coworker. And yet Jesus is asking us to fulfill our commitments. Why? Because when we're in a situation where we feel like we don't have control, where we feel like we can't control the outcome, what he commands us to do is, first and foremost, he says, don't swear. Don't make a promise that you can't keep. And especially don't bring God into it. Don't bring God's name into it. And regardless of whether or not you think you do, maybe you're sitting here and you're like, well, I never swear by God, or I never swear by heaven, or I never swear by the city of Jerusalem, right? One of the things that you see as you look at this text and as you look at what Jesus is saying here is he's confronting these religious people who at least have, at bare minimum, some type of reverence for God. And so the reason they're not swearing by God's name directly is because they're swearing by things adjacent to God. So they're swearing by heaven or by earth. And what Jesus is saying, he's like, I'm the King of Kings. I'm the Lord of Lords. Heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. The city of Jerusalem, I'm the King of all Israel. I am the greatest king there ever was. I'm the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So it doesn't matter what you bring into your promise or what you bring into your claim, because I'm the ruler of all of it. Even if you want to swear by the hairs on your head, I'm the ruler of all of it. I spoke this world into existence. And so whatever you attempt to swear by, you're still swearing or trying to bring me into the mix. And I would rather not be brought into the mix for a commitment to be failed with or fumbled, and then it falls through, and now my name and my reputation is at stake when you don't follow through with your word and your commitment. Instead, he says, just let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. And so for a really long time, I thought, I don't struggle with this. This isn't something that I do. And then I began thinking, and I began reflecting, and I was like, no. When my wife and I started dating, and actually in a previous dating relationship as well, like, again, there's this moment where you're dating, where you're getting to know somebody. There's a deficit of trust. They don't, trust is something you have to build up over time, and you don't just give somebody full trust on day one. And so there were so many different moments in my dating relationship where Victoria would say to me, she would be like, well, do you promise? Or do you pinky promise? And I was like, fine, I pinky promise that I'm going to fulfill what I say. I promise that I'm going to do what I said. Or I promise that I'm going to keep my word. I promise that I love you. I pinky promise that, whatever it is, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden I realized, like, no, I'm swearing not by the hairs on my head, because I don't got a lot right now, but I'm swearing by a different anatomical part just because it's more convenient and more relevant to today's culture. And Jesus just encourages us. He says, hey, let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. And that's actually really hard to do, because what he's challenging us to is to have our actions substantiate our claims. And here's the reality. When our actions operate in congruency with our words, it magnifies the message that we have. But when our actions contradict our words, when they run in opposition to what we say, and when opposition, then what happens is then we actually increase the gap of trust and enlarge that deficit that's there. And so the way to bridge the deficit gap of trust is to allow our actions to be held in congruency with what we do. One theologian, if you read the commentary, he says this. He said, Jesus' followers should be people whose words are so characterized by integrity that others need no formal assurance of their truthfulness in order to trust them. As followers of Jesus, we should be people of integrity. We should be people whose words and whose actions are trustworthy. But the problem is, it's really hard for us not only to control our words, it's hard for us to control our actions. Actions in and of themselves are hard to control. Why? Because as people, we have strong emotion, and our emotions get brought into this, and circumstance gets brought into this. And so our actions can also be really difficult to control at times. I remember when I was growing up, many of you probably, in middle school, I was bullied a lot as a kid. So all throughout elementary school and even into middle school, I was bullied. And as a sixth grader, every single day that I got on the bus, the upperclassmen, they would ridicule me, they'd mock me, they'd make fun of how I looked, they'd make fun of my skin tone, they'd make fun of all different types of things. And not only would they verbally assault me, but they would also physically come against me. And sometimes they'd throw me up against a wall. Sometimes they'd be throwing stuff at me. And one day in particular, I remember getting on the bus and I'm walking towards the back. I'm just trying to avoid them at any and all costs. And I'm trying to go find my seat. And they throw this metal can. It was a cashews can. I still remember it. And it just hit me square in the head. And I went home with this massive welt that day. And so this was just like my daily rhythm and what I would experience in middle school. And so in those moments, it was hard to control my actions because I was filled with anger, and I was filled with bitterness, and I was filled with resentment. I was filled with all these negative emotions towards this person, and I wanted to lash out. I wanted to respond. I wanted to do something to retaliate, but they were bigger and stronger and older. And I didn't feel that I had the power or the authority to create change in that moment. And so again, I'm found in a situation where I feel like I'm struggling to have control, and yet I'm longing to respond. I'm longing to try and seize control and to do something about it. But I don't know what to do other than retaliate. And I also know, as someone who grew up in a Christian household, and my parents did an awesome job trying to disciple me and share their faith with me, that I knew that I wasn't supposed to retaliate, or at least I thought. So how do we respond when we're mistreated? How do we respond when we feel like we don't have control? Jesus continues to give us insight into this question. He says, you have heard it said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and to take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. So what is Jesus verse and this passage have been misused in a lot of contexts. And some people use this passage to say that we should allow sin to continue to perpetuate. We should just kind of turn the other cheek. Some people have used this passage to teach that we should be pacifists. I don't believe that's what Jesus is teaching here in this moment. But I do believe that he's teaching us something about how to respond when people mistreat us. And so what is he actually telling us? I think what Jesus is getting at here is Jesus is saying, hey, when you feel that there's a deficit in power and authority, and you have this longing to seize control, don't respond as the world responds. The world will say, hey, get even. Get them back. Do whatever it takes at any and all costs. And you need look no further than the comment section in Instagram to know that this is true. All right, if somebody says something about you, immediately what happens? They jump back in the thread and it becomes a thumb war. I mean, literally, like it's like, how many words can I say about this person? I remember the first spoken word video I ever did. I was talking about the character of God, and somebody jumped in there and said something, and my temptation was, I want to jump back and just say something and be a smart aleck and try to outsmart him. And man, like, Instagram's full of that. It's why people enjoy reading the comment section on Instagram, is because they know it's just this war section and one person's trying to get another person back. But here's the reality, like our culture celebrates retribution. It celebrates trying to get even. I remember when I played football, if somebody knocked me out, then the next play, I was going to go find that number. It didn't matter what the coach said. It didn't matter what the play was. I was going to go find that dude and I was going to go knock him out. As hard as, and then what was going to happen? As soon as I did it, the whole sideline, they were going, yeah. Why? Because our culture celebrates getting even. If somebody hurts you or mistreats you, and you go back to your girls, if you're talking to a guy and he says something dumb, which guys do all the time, and you go back to your girls and it's like, okay, well, we got to get him back. Or how are we going to do it? Whatever it is. We live in a culture where we always are trying to get even when we feel mistreated, when we feel maligned, or when we feel hurt. And the goal, the thing that Jesus instructs us to do in those moments isn't just to restrain. Like that's the thing I was trying to do in those moments when I was being bullied and I was in middle school. I was just trying to withhold the negative response that I wanted to exhibit towards them. And so I was living in this posture of restraint. But Jesus actually doesn't just say, hey, it's withhold your negative response. He actually instructs us to give them a positive response. And that's actually the challenging moment. That's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where the friction occurs, because he asks us to treat them positively, even as they're treating us negatively. And so he says this. He says, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anybody slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. And so again, people will use this as a way to condone sin. Jesus is not telling us that we should live or permit an environment of abuse or manipulation to continue to persist. That's not what he's saying. But what he is saying is this: if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, okay, in that culture, in order to be slapped on the right cheek, that means that you had to be backhanded. It was a backhanded slap in order for them to hit you on the right cheek. And even in today's culture, if you receive a backhanded slap from somebody, that's a sign of disrespect. So when he says, hey, turn to them the other cheek, what he's not saying is just continue to permit it to happen. What he's saying is at least make them, if they're going to slap you, make them slap you in a way where they at least have to see you and respect you and do it in a respectful manner. I mean, you think about the slap contest that happened today. It's all open-handed. So at least it's sportsmanlike, if you want to call it that. I think it's probably the dumbest sport that's ever came into existence. But that's a whole nother subject. And so he goes, and if you don't believe me, he goes a step further and he says this: and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, he's like, well, just be generous. Because we're recipients of grace. And so when people want something, he's like, just give it to them. Be generous people when they're trying to steal or to take from you. And so he says, one up them, treat them with love and respect and generosity. That's how we're called to treat those who are harsh to us. And then he goes a step further and he says, and if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. So again, that day and age, that culture, if a Roman officer approached you, whether you were eating dinner or out working the field, and he said, hey, I want you to pick up my stuff, by Roman law, you had to carry his armor and all of his equipment for 1 mile. And what Jesus is saying, he's saying, he's like, okay, people are going to mistreat you. That's part of living this side of heaven. But when people mistreat you, don't just withhold a negative response from them. Demonstrate a positive response. And so literally as these people are being treated like a donkey or like a three-letter word, right? Jesus says, he says, hey, what I want you to do is to go the extra mile. Why don't you just serve them even in the midst of them maligning you and degrading you and viewing you as less than. And when you do that, when you love them and when you serve them above and beyond whatever they would think or expect, that's actually the way that you demonstrate the love of Jesus. And when they begin to see that type of love, all of a sudden they're like, something's different about this person. And all of a sudden they start to think and to question you differently. I know some of the most embarrassing moments in my life, some of the moments where I felt the most guilty are the moments where I've been so mean to my little sister or to one of my siblings or to somebody in general. And they've just been so kind to me. And I'm like, what the heck? Now I feel like a scumbag. Like, what am I doing? Because what happens when they respond with kindness, what happens when they respond with love, what happens when they respond with generosity and service is I begin to see value in them. And my perspective of them begins to shift, and I begin to see them as more and more value. I begin to see them the way that God made them to be. And that's what God is calling us to do. He's saying, hey, don't permit mistreatment to happen. Don't just allow it to keep being perpetuated, but in the midst of being mistreated, go the extra mile to love people even who are hard to love. And that's what he then goes on to say in the next verse, verse 43. He says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise on both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. You see, the thing that Jesus calls us to is not just to love those that are easy to love. He calls us to love those that are really difficult to love. The people who annoy us. The people who treat us wrongly. Those are the people, especially those people. Why? Because when we do, we demonstrate that we're not like, that we're actually different, that we're children of God. How did we become children of God? Because Romans 5:8 says that even while we were still sinners, not the version of us that was loving of God, not the version of us that was obedient to God, the version of us that hated God, the version of us that said, screw you, I'm going to do something else, the version of us that was disobedient and disregarding of his way, that was disregarding of his command, the version of us that wanted to be glorified, the version of us that was lustful, the version of us that was filled with anger, the version of us that doesn't keep our word, the version of us, that's the version that in the midst of our sin, in the midst of our rebellion, Jesus said, I'm going to die for you on a cross. And he demonstrated our love, his love for us in the midst of our rebellion. And so the way that we know we're recipients of the greatest love that has ever existed and that will ever exist is if we then begin to share that love with the world. And when we share that love with the world, it changes. It changes their perspective of us. It changes their perspective of God. And it begins something new in their heart and in their life. And they begin and we begin to experience the good life. But the good life doesn't need to wait for our life to be good. The good life doesn't wait for people to treat us good. The good life is waiting for us to be obedient to the thing that God is calling us to do, which is to love other people. Y'all, I don't get bonus points in the kingdom of God for loving my wife and for loving my kids, okay? I met this trainer the other day at the gym. Even he doesn't know Jesus. I'm confident of that. But even in talking with this trainer, he loves his kids. It's natural to love your kids. It's natural for me to have a love for Amari and Zay and do whatever it takes to love them, even when they throw a temper tantrum. Like, I will love them till the day that I die. But that's not supernatural. Like, that's not otherworldly. What's otherworldly is when I see somebody who's mean to me, when I see somebody who's difficult to love, when my neighbor who I just struggle to build a relationship with or to enjoy time with at times, when I go to that person and I'm intentional about loving them, that's when I actually begin to display the love of God. Not just the love I have. And the world begins to see us differently. We love them with a different type of love. And so that's what Jesus is inviting us into. I recently read a story about this Cambodian guy, and his name's Samakti Kim. And all 8 of his siblings were murdered and beaten with a machete in Cambodia. And he was one of them. He was beaten, and he was left for dead. And the people who were beating him left the scene, and they thought that he had died. And he was the only one in his family that lived and that made it through that moment. And so for years, he lived with rage. For years, he desired retribution. For years, he had this longing to get even and to find the murderers and to get back. And then he became a follower of Jesus. And from that point on, the thing that he longed to do was to go and meet them and extend to them forgiveness. And so the day came, this dude was passionate and dead set, I'm going to find these guys. And he did. He found them. And in that moment, he shook their hands and he shared the love of Jesus with them, and he told them that he forgave them for taking all of his family's life. That's the type of radical love that Jesus is inviting us into. That's what he says in Matthew 5:46. And what I'm confident of is all of us can think of one person that God's asking us to love. But even if you couldn't, he gives us verse 47. It says this: and if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? I think it's really easy for me to greet only my own people. If I go into a room, the people that I'm going to gravitate towards are the people that I know the best or that I know the most. And I think in a space where, man, we have the opportunity to have so many people, different people and different backgrounds in this space, some in college, some out of college, some who go to UNW, some go to U of M. There's just a diversity in this room, and that's beautiful. But the thing that God does when we enter in a relationship with him is he makes us one. He unites us. And so he's saying, hey, greet other people who are different than you. Don't just greet your own people. Greet everybody, treat everybody with love. That's the thing that he calls us to do. So how do we respond when we don't feel like we have control? Because here's the reality. We're human, and we don't have control. We'll never feel like we're able to control all the components of our life. We'll never be able to convince somebody to change their mind or to change their opinion. We won't be able to control how other people treat us. But there's one thing that we can control, and that's whether or not we trust God, who's in control of it all. And so my encouragement to us is that we would surrender our facade or the appearance of control to God. That we choose to trust him when life feels out of control. And the evidence of our surrender to God is obedience. Obedience is evidence that you have chosen to surrender to the Lord. So how is Jesus asking us to obey this week and today? Well, number one, he's saying, let your yes be yes and your no be your no. If you make a commitment, then keep it. And number two, he's asking us to love our enemies, to love those who are difficult to love. And when we do, it's evidence that we're choosing to trust him even when we feel like life's out of control. So let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for this night. Thank you so much for the power of your word. Thank you so much that you have given us your word so we can learn what it means to live in the good life, and we can learn how to access that, God. And I thank you that you have come to give us a new way of living, a way that's different and distinct from this world. Help us to display that this week. Help us to display that in our relationships with people in this room and with people outside of this room. God, may people come into a knowledge of who you are, because of the way that we love, because of the way that we trust you, and because of the way we keep your word. God, we surrender all of our life to you. It's in your name I pray. Amen.